She pressed the folded paper into his manicured hand with fingers that shook from more than just the dinner rush, and when he read those 4 words, everything he'd built his empire on crumbled. It's so great to have you here. If you're ready to dive into today's captivating story, please hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from around the world. I love connecting with viewers from everywhere. Speaking of which, I've got another fascinating story lined up for you tomorrow that I think you'll find just as compelling as today's tale. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. But enough about tomorrow. Let's jump into today's story. Tuesday, March 15, 2025. Seattle, Washington. The alarm screamed at 5:47 a.m. in the glass tower that pierced Seattle's skyline like a steel needle. 43 floors above Elliott Bay, Harrison Webb opened his eyes to another identical morning. The automated blinds revealed the Space Needle standing guard over a city that bent to his will, yet felt as distant as the moon. Harrison's bare feet touched Italian marble as he moved through his penthouse. Everything here cost more than most people earned in years. The coffee machine imported from Switzerland. The shower with water pressure engineered to perfection. The walk-in closet larger than studio apartments he'd once lived in. He selected a navy Tom Ford suit, the fabric flowing like liquid midnight. His reflection stared back from mirrors that had witnessed 15 years of identical mornings. Same routine. Same emptiness dressed in designer clothing. The Seattle Times lay folded beside his untouched breakfast. Webb Industries stock hits record high. His phone buzzed with congratulations from executives who barely knew his middle name. Success measured in numbers that meant nothing when you ate dinner alone every night for 3 years. Harrison's fingers traced the edge of a photograph, half hidden beneath financial reports. A little girl with pigtails smiled back at him, gap-toothed and radiant. The image felt like looking at someone else's life now. His driver waited downstairs. The city rushed past his tinted windows. Thousands of people living lives he'd forgotten how to touch. Board meetings. Conference calls. Decisions that moved millions but changed nothing that mattered. Same morning, Rainier Valley, Seattle. The alarm didn't wake Nicole Washington because she'd never fallen asleep. Hospital bills spread across her kitchen table like fallen leaves, each one demanding money she didn't have. The numbers blurred together until they became a weight pressing against her chest. Her daughter Kenna's breathing echoed from the bedroom, shallow and labored. The 7-year-old had been fighting pneumonia for 2 weeks while Nicole fought insurance companies and payment plans that stretched into infinity. Nicole's uniform hung on the bathroom door, pressed and ready. Black slacks that had seen 3 years of restaurant shifts. White button-down with tiny burn marks from splattered grease. Non-slip shoes that knew every inch of marble floors they'd never own. She moved through her morning ritual in the dim apartment. Instant coffee because the good stuff was a luxury she'd forgotten. Checking on Kenna, who stirred but didn't wake. Counting the tips from last night's shift, knowing they fell short again. The mirror reflected exhaustion she couldn't afford to show. Nicole tied her dark hair into a practical style that kept it away from food and out of her eyes. She'd been beautiful once, before survival became her full-time job. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor. Early shift today. VIP section. The VIP section meant better tips. It also meant serving people who spent her monthly rent on a single bottle of wine. Nicole had learned to become invisible there, to anticipate needs without existing as a person. The wealthy liked their service seamless and silent. She kissed Kenna's forehead, left medicine beside the bed with careful instructions for her neighbor who'd check in. The bus ride to downtown Seattle took 45 minutes. Enough time to transform from exhausted mother into professional server. The Meridian restaurant occupied the ground level of the Webb Tower, its reputation built on exclusivity and prices that filtered out everyone except the elite. Nicole had worked there for 3 years, serving tech moguls and real estate kings who never looked at her face. She tied her apron in the staff room, checking her reflection one final time. Game face on. Survival mode activated. The Meridian restaurant. 11:30 a.m. Steam rose from the kitchen as lunch prep began. Nicole arranged silverware with mechanical precision, each placement identical to thousands before. The VIP section gleamed under soft lighting, Every table set for diners who'd never wonder about the hands that arranged their comfort. Her supervisor approached with the day's assignments. Table 7 just called. Harrison Webb. His usual. Nicole's stomach tightened. She'd served the billionaire before, watched him eat alone while reading reports that probably decided the fate of companies. He tipped well but existed in his own universe, speaking only to order and dismiss. "What's his usual?" she asked, though she already knew. "Ribeye, medium rare. Sparkling water." No conversation. The kitchen moved around her like a choreographed dance. Chefs called out orders. Servers balanced impossible loads. Nicole found her rhythm in the chaos, muscle memory guiding her through motions that paid the bills but never filled the emptiness. Her phone vibrated. Text from her neighbor. "Kenna asking for you." Fever's down. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by guilt. Her daughter needed her home, but home didn't pay for medicine. The morning rush built steadily. Tech executives grabbed quick lunches between meetings. Real estate developers discussed deals worth more than her lifetime earnings. Nicole moved between tables like a ghost, fulfilling needs for people who never saw her face. At 12:15, the familiar black car pulled up outside. Through the restaurant's windows, Nicole watched Harrison Webb emerge. Tall, controlled, wearing success-like armor that kept the world at arm's length. He walked with purpose but no destination, power that brought no peace. Nicole recognized something in his movements, a careful isolation she understood too well. Harrison entered the restaurant and scanned the room. His eyes passed over her without recognition, the way they always did. To him, she was part of the scenery, functional as the chairs and tables. The hostess led him to table 7. Nicole took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and approached with practiced professionalism. "Good afternoon. Can I start you with something to drink?" Harrison didn't look up from his phone. "Sparkling water." "I'll have the ribeye medium rare." Same order. Same dismissive tone. Nicole started to turn away, then stopped. Something about his posture, the way he held his shoulders, triggered a recognition that hit like lightning. She'd seen that exact stance before. In mirrors. In her daughter's room during the worst nights. The careful control of someone holding themselves together by pure will. Nicole's hand moved to the small notebook in her apron pocket. Before she could stop herself, she was writing. For words that emerged from somewhere deeper than thought, truer than safety. The note folded easily in her palm. Her training screamed warnings. Her job hung in the balance. But Kenna's labored breathing echoed in her memory, and she thought about all the people who'd never seen her either. "I'll have that right out," she said, and placed the folded paper beside his water glass. Harrison's fingers found the note without thinking. He unfolded it while Nicole walked away, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I see your pain." The words stopped his world. His hand froze. The restaurant continued around him, but every sound faded to silence. Those 4 words, written in careful handwriting, reached across an impossible divide and named something he'd hidden from everyone, including himself. Harrison looked up for the first time in 3 years of identical lunches. The waitress stood by the kitchen door, her back to him, but something about her posture had changed. The careful invisibility was gone, replaced by a trembling courage that had just shifted the foundation of his universe. For the first time since his daughter died, Harrison Webb felt seen. Harrison stared at the 4 words until they burned into his vision. "I see your pain." The paper trembled in his fingers, not from the restaurant's air conditioning, but from something breaking loose inside his chest. 3 years. 3 years since Lily's funeral, since he'd perfected the art of existing without living. Board meetings became refuge. Profit margins became purpose. He'd built walls so high that even he'd forgotten what lay buried beneath them. Now a stranger's handwriting had reached through steel and glass to touch the wound he'd convinced himself had healed. Harrison's eyes found Nicole across the dining room. She stood beside the water station, her back rigid with the consequences of what she'd just done. Her hands gripped a water pitcher like an anchor, knuckles darker against her brown skin. The restaurant moved around them in slow motion. Conversations hummed from other tables. Kitchen sounds echoed from behind swinging doors. But between table 7 and the water station, time had stopped. Nicole turned, and their eyes met for the first time. He saw everything in that moment. The exhaustion she couldn't hide. The fear of overstepping boundaries that kept people like her employed and invisible. But underneath it all, something fiercer. Recognition. The same hollow ache he carried. She'd lost someone too. Harrison's throat closed. His billion-dollar empire, his carefully controlled existence, his reputation for never showing weakness. All of it felt as fragile as tissue paper. This woman who served his food had seen through armor that defeated hostile takeovers and congressional hearings. Nicole approached his table with steps that measured the distance between worlds. Her server training warred with whatever had possessed her to write those words. "Is everything acceptable, sir?" The question came out formal, but her voice carried undertones that had nothing to do with customer service. Harrison folded the note carefully, his movements deliberate. Where did this come from? The question hung between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Nicole's training screamed at her to apologize, to retreat into professional invisibility. Her manager could fire her for personal interaction with VIPs. Her bills couldn't afford principals. But Kenna's face flashed in her mind. 7 years old and fighting for breath while her mother fought for tips. What was the point of invisible survival if it meant staying silent when someone else was drowning? "Sometimes we recognize our own," Nicole said quietly. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything Harrison thought he knew about his carefully constructed life. He'd attended grief counselors who'd never touched the center of his pain. He'd endured well-meaning friends who spoke in platitudes about time healing all wounds. But 4 words from a stranger had found the exact spot where his heart kept bleeding. "You don't know anything about me," he said. But the defensive edge couldn't hide the tremor underneath. Nicole's laugh held no humor. "I know you eat alone every Tuesday for 3 years. I know you read reports instead of talking. I know you tip exactly 25% because it's generous enough to ease conscience but not enough to create connection." Each observation hit like a surgical strike. Harrison's jaw tightened. "That's your job. To observe and serve. My job is to be invisible." Nicole's voice gained strength. "But today I'm tired of pretending neither of us is hurting." The restaurant sounds faded to white noise. Other diners continued their lives, unaware that at table 7, 2 strangers were dismantling the walls that kept pain private and connection impossible. Harrison looked down at his hands. Manicured. Soft. Hands that signed contracts worth millions but hadn't held another human being in 3 years. "You could lose your job for this. I could lose my daughter for staying quiet." The words escaped before Nicole could stop them. Too much truth, too fast. Her supervisor was watching from across the room, probably wondering why she was lingering at one table. But Harrison's head snapped up, and something shifted in his expression. The careful mask cracked completely. "How old?" he asked. 7. Nicole's voice broke slightly. "Pneumonia. The insurance company thinks it's not serious enough for better coverage." Harrison closed his eyes. 7. The same age Lily had been when the drunk driver ran the red light. 7 years old and infinite possibility, reduced to medical bills and mother's desperate prayers. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it in ways that had nothing to do with politeness. Nicole saw the genuine grief in his face and felt her own defenses crumble. This wasn't customer service anymore. This was 2 people recognizing the same loss in each other's eyes. "What was her name?" Nicole asked softly. Harrison's breath caught. No one asked about Lily anymore. His friends had stopped mentioning her after the first year, deciding his healing required forgetting. His business associates had never known she existed. "Lily," he whispered. "Lily and Webb. Tell me about her." The simple request destroyed him. Harrison's hands shook as 3 years of buried memories fought their way to the surface. Lily's laugh that sounded like wind chimes. Her habit of leaving drawings under his pillow. The way she'd crawl into his bed during thunderstorms and explain her complicated dreams until they both fell asleep. She drew pictures, he managed. Everywhere. On napkins on my important papers. I used to get so frustrated about the mess. Nicole's eyes filled with understanding. What I wouldn't give for Kenna to mess up my important papers. The shared recognition of how love looked different on the other side of loss hit them both simultaneously. Harrison laughed, a sound rusty from disuse, and Nicole smiled for the first time in weeks. Around them, the lunch rush continued. Servers delivered expensive meals to people discussing stock options and merger deals. But at table 7, 2 people had found something more valuable than anything money could buy. I kept them, Harrison said suddenly. All her drawings. I have a whole room full of them. I kept Kenna's hospital bracelet from when she was born, Nicole admitted. Carry it in my pocket during hard shifts. They were crossing into territory that had no maps, no protocol. A billionaire and a waitress sharing the specific weight of loving someone whose absence changed everything. Harrison looked at Nicole, really looked at her, for the first time. Beyond the uniform and the professional smile, he saw intelligence and strength and a beauty that had nothing to do with appearances. He saw someone who understood that success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. Nicole saw past the expensive suit and practiced authority to someone as lost as she was. Someone who'd forgotten how to connect because connection meant risking the kind of pain that could break you completely. Sir. Another server approached hesitantly. Your ribeye. The spell broke partially. Reality reasserted itself in the form of cooling meat and restaurant schedules. Nicole stepped back, remembering her place, but something fundamental had shifted. Harrison looked at the steak he'd ordered out of habit, not hunger. Food meant nothing when you just rediscovered what it felt like to be understood. Actually, he said, his voice gaining certainty, I think I'd like to order something different today. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire neither of them had meant to start. Harrison stared at the untouched ribeye while Nicole stood frozen beside his table. Both of them suddenly aware of the magnitude of what had just happened. The restaurant's familiar rhythm crashed back around them. Silverware clinked against porcelain. Conversations about quarterly earnings and property acquisitions resumed their background hum. The world had kept spinning while theirs had stopped completely. Nicole's training kicked in like a slap. She was a server. He was a customer. She'd just spent 10 minutes discussing personal trauma with a man who could buy and sell her entire neighborhood without checking his bank balance. She started, stepping backward. Your meal is getting cold. Harrison looked down at the steak as if seeing it for the first time. The meat sat congealing in its own juices, as appealing as cardboard. 3 years of identical orders, identical meals eaten in identical silence. What had he been thinking, suggesting something different? Right, he said, his voice regaining its professional edge. Of course. But his hands betrayed him, folding and unfolding the note until the paper showed where marks. For words that had seemed to unlock everything now felt dangerous, reckless. He was Harrison Webb. He didn't have emotional conversations with restaurant staff. He didn't share details about Lily with anyone, let alone a stranger whose name he didn't even know. Nicole felt her manager's eyes boring into her back. She'd been at table 7 too long, engaged in conversation that had nothing to do with food service. Her job hung by threads already. One customer complaint, one missed payment on her training fees, and she'd be looking for work in a city that didn't forgive gaps in employment history. Is there anything else you need? She asked, falling back into the script that had kept her employed for 3 years. The formality hit Harrison like cold water. Whatever had passed between them was being carefully erased, tucked back behind professional boundaries that existed for good reasons. He was being foolish, reading meaning into a moment of shared grief that probably meant nothing to her. No, he said, cutting into the steak with mechanical precision. This is fine. But it wasn't fine. The meat tasted like sawdust. The restaurant felt smaller, more claustrophobic than before. He'd spent 3 years perfecting the art of emotional numbness, and 4 words from a waitress had undone all of it. Nicole walked away with careful, measured steps. She stopped at the water station and gripped the pitcher until her knuckles went white, trying to steady hands that wouldn't stop shaking. What had she been thinking? Kenna needed this job. Needed the insurance, inadequate as it was. Needed a mother who showed up, not one who threw away their stability for a moment of connection with someone who lived in a different universe. Nicole. Her supervisor appeared beside her, voice low but sharp. Table 12 needs water. Table 15 wants to modify their order. And Table 7 has been waiting for attention. Translation. Stop lingering and do your job. Nicole nodded, forcing her face back into the pleasant neutrality that customers expected. She filled water glasses and took orders and pretended her hands weren't still trembling from the weight of shared grief. At Table 7, Harrison ate his steak in silence. Each bite reminded him of the conversation he'd already decided was a mistake. He was vulnerable today. The anniversary of Lily's death always made him weak, susceptible to seeing meaning where none existed. The waitress was probably trained to make customers feel special. Maybe she'd watched him enough to recognize his patterns and had simply used that knowledge to create a moment that felt more significant than it was. People in service jobs learn to read body language, to mirror emotions back in ways that encouraged tips. But the note sat beside his plate, those 4 words refusing to be dismissed as professional manipulation. I see your pain. No one had seen his pain. He'd made sure of that. Harrison pulled out his phone, scrolling through emails that had accumulated during lunch. Board meeting at 3. Conference call with Tokyo at 5. Decisions to make about the Portland acquisition. His real life waited, the life that had meaning and purpose and didn't include emotional conversations with strangers. He flagged urgent messages and deleted promotional emails, but his eyes kept drifting to Nicole as she moved between tables. She was good at her job, he noticed. Anticipating needs without being intrusive. Smiling at customers who barely acknowledged her existence. Had he imagined the moment between them? The way her voice had broken when she mentioned her daughter? The recognition in her eyes when he said Lily's name? Harrison's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Board moved meeting to 2:30. Car waiting. He looked at his watch. 1:15. Time to go back to the world where he knew the rules, where emotions were liabilities and connections were strategic alliances. Time to forget about waitresses who wrote devastating notes and 7-year-old girls fighting pneumonia. He signaled for the check, falling back into the familiar ritual of payment and departure. Nicole approached with the leather folder, her face carefully blank. How was everything today? She asked, the question automatic. Fine, Harrison replied, though the steak had been mediocre and the experience had been anything but fine. He placed his credit card in the folder without looking at her. Nicole processed the payment in silence. Her hands moved efficiently. Swipe the card, print the receipt, return everything with a pen for his signature. 3 years of practice made the motions effortless. Harrison signed with his usual 25% tip, the amount Nicole had mentioned earlier. The irony wasn't lost on either of them, but acknowledging it would mean admitting the conversation had happened. Thank you for dining with us, Nicole said, her voice professionally pleasant. We hope to see you again soon. The dismissal was gentle but absolute. Harrison stood, straightening his suit jacket and checking his phone for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. His driver would be outside. The board meeting awaited. His real life was calling. He walked toward the exit without looking back, but at the door, something made him pause. Nicole stood beside table 7, clearing away his untouched bread and half-eaten steak. She moved with the efficiency of someone who couldn't afford to waste time on might-have-beens. For a moment, Harrison considered turning around. Considered asking her name, her daughter's condition, whether the note had meant what he thought it meant. But his phone buzzed again, his assistant wondering where he was, and the moment passed. Harrison pushed through the restaurant door into Seattle's afternoon drizzle, leaving behind 4 words that had shattered his careful composure and a woman who'd seen through armor he'd thought was impenetrable. In the restaurant, Nicole folded his napkin and wiped down table 7 with practiced motions. The note had disappeared, probably thrown away with the breadbasket. Good. It was better that way. She had tables to serve and bills to pay and a daughter who needed her to be practical, not romantic. She'd risked enough for one day. But as she reset the table for the next customer, Nicole's fingers found her apron pocket, where Harrison's generous tip joined the growing collection that might, just might, be enough for Kenna's next round of medicine. Perhaps that was connection enough. Perhaps that was all either of them could afford. Harrison was halfway to his car when the explosion shattered the afternoon quiet. The sound came from behind him, a tremendous crash followed by screaming. He spun around to see smoke pouring from the Meridian's kitchen windows. Through the glass doors, he watched chaos erupt as diners stumbled toward exits and servers rushed to help elderly customers navigate overturned chairs. His driver jumped from the car, phone already pressed to his ear, calling emergency services. "Sir, we should move further back." But Harrison was already running toward the restaurant. Inside, the sprinkler system had activated, turning the elegant dining room into a maze of falling water and scattered customers. A gas line explosion in the kitchen had blown out windows and knocked several people to the ground. The acrid smell of smoke mixed with the metallic taste of fear. Harrison pushed through the fleeing crowd, scanning faces for one in particular. Table servers guided customers toward exits while kitchen staff stumbled from the back, coughing and disoriented. He found Nicole kneeling beside table 15, where an elderly woman sat dazed and bleeding from a cut on her forehead. Nicole had torn strips from her apron to apply pressure to the wound, her hands steady despite the chaos around them. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" Nicole asked the woman, her voice calm and professional despite water streaming down her face. The woman's eyes struggled to focus. What happened?" "Just a small accident. You're going to be fine." Nicole looked up as Harrison approached, surprise flickering across her features before she turned back to her patient. "Sir, please keep moving toward the exit." "I'm staying." Harrison knelt beside them without being asked. "What do you need?" Nicole's initial protest died when she saw the determination in his face. The restaurant evacuation continued around them, but the elderly woman couldn't be moved until the bleeding stopped. "Hold this," Nicole said, placing his hand over the makeshift bandage. "Firm pressure, but don't press too hard." Harrison's fingers replaced hers, their hands brushing for a moment that had nothing to do with the emergency and everything to do with the connection they'd both tried to dismiss. "Mrs. Patterson," the woman said suddenly, her voice stronger. "My name is Evelyn Patterson." "Good," Nicole smiled, checking the woman's pupils for signs of concussion. "Mrs. Patterson, we're going to get you to a hospital just to make sure everything's okay." The paramedics arrived as Nicole predicted. She'd obviously dealt with medical emergencies before. They took over Mrs. Patterson's care with efficient professionalism, loading her onto a stretcher while Nicole provided a clear summary of her injuries and treatment. The restaurant emptied except for staff and emergency personnel. Harrison and Nicole found themselves standing in the wreckage, both soaked from the sprinklers, both reluctant to acknowledge that circumstances had forced them back together. "You should go," Nicole said, wringing water from her hair. "Your suit is ruined." Harrison looked down at his $1,000 outfit, now dripping and stained. "It's just clothing." The simplicity of his response surprised them both. 3 hours ago, his appearance had been armor. Now it felt irrelevant. A fire captain approached them. "We need to interview everyone who was in the building when the explosion occurred. Are you both available to give statements?" They were led to a coffee shop across the street that had volunteered as a temporary refuge for displaced diners and staff. Harrison and Nicole sat at a small table near the window, watching emergency vehicles surround the Meridian while investigators worked to determine what had caused the gas leak. "This could take hours," the fire captain told them. "We appreciate your patience." Nicole checked her phone for the 15th time. "I need to call my neighbor. Tell her I'll be late picking up Kenna." "Is she okay?" "Your daughter." The question came naturally, without the careful boundaries they'd erected earlier. Crisis had a way of stripping away pretense. Today was better. Temperature down, breathing easier. Nicole's relief was evident. "But I still worry when I'm not there." Harrison understood that particular anxiety, the way love multiplied every fear until leaving the house felt like abandoning your post. He'd felt it every time Lily had gotten sick, every time he'd had to travel for business. "How long has she been ill?" Nicole hesitated, then seemed to decide that normal rules didn't apply when you were both homeless and dripping wet in a strange coffee shop. 3 weeks. Started as a cold, but her lungs are weak from being born premature. The coffee shop owner brought them towels and hot coffee without being asked, a kindness that felt significant after the day's chaos. Nicole wrapped the towel around her shoulders gratefully. Born at 32 weeks, she continued, staring into her coffee. Spent 2 months in NICU. I lived in that hospital, sleeping in chairs and learning to be strong when I wanted to fall apart. Harrison's chest tightened. Lily had been born healthy, full-term, perfect in every way. The drunk driver had taken her on a random Tuesday, but Nicole had been fighting for her daughter's life from the very beginning. "You were alone?" he asked quietly. Nicole's laugh held no humor. Her father decided premature babies were too much responsibility. Signed away his rights before she left the hospital. The casual way she delivered devastating information reminded Harrison of his own tendency to minimize pain. Some wounds were too deep for dramatic presentation. They could only be stated as facts. "I'm sorry," he said, meaning it completely. "Don't be. Kenna and I are better off. Some people aren't built for the hard parts of love." The statement hung between them, loaded with implications neither wanted to examine too closely. They were both people who'd learned that love came with unbearable risk, the possibility of loss that could destroy everything you thought you were. Nicole's phone rang. Her neighbor's number. She answered quickly, worry creeping into her voice. "Hi, Mrs. Rodriguez. Yes, I'm fine. What do you mean she's asking for me?" "Her fever's back up." "Okay, I'm coming. I'm coming right now." She ended the call and stood abruptly, panic replacing exhaustion. "I have to go. Kenna's temperature spiked again and she won't take her medicine from anyone else. The fire captain said we need to stay for statements." "I don't care what he said." Nicole's voice rose slightly. "My daughter needs me." Harrison watched her gather her things with frantic efficiency. 3 weeks of a sick child, financial pressure, and now this crisis had pushed her past her breaking point. She was about to walk out of the coffee shop and potentially face consequences with both the fire department and her employer. "Wait," he said, standing. "I'll talk to the captain. Explain the situation." Nicole paused, her hand on her purse strap. "Why would you do that?" "Because if it were Lily, I'd want someone to help me get to her." The admission slipped out before he could stop it. The first time he'd spoken about his daughter in present tense since her death. But instead of the usual stab of pain, the words brought something closer to peace. Nicole stared at him for a long moment, seeing past the expensive suit and careful control to someone who understood that nothing mattered more than a sick child's call for their parent. "Thank you," she said simply. Harrison approached the fire captain while Nicole called for a ride she couldn't afford. Within 10 minutes, he'd arranged for her to give her statement the following day and had somehow convinced the investigator that her presence wasn't immediately critical. When he returned to their table, Nicole was hanging up her phone with obvious frustration. "No cars available for 40 minutes, she said. "The explosion has everything backed up." Harrison pulled out his own phone. "My driver is still outside." Nicole's automatic refusal died on her lips as another call came through from her neighbor. Kenna's fever was climbing, and she was crying for her mother. Sometimes pride was a luxury you couldn't afford. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you." The black Mercedes felt like stepping into another universe. Nicole slid across leather seats that probably cost more than her monthly rent while Harrison settled beside her, giving his driver an address in Rainier Valley that made the man's eyebrows lift slightly. 20 minutes, the driver said, pulling away from the chaos of emergency vehicles. 20 minutes. Nicole's phone showed 6 missed calls from Mrs. Rodriguez in the last 10 minutes. Kenna's fever had spiked to 102, and she was asking for her mama between fits of coughing that scared her elderly babysitter. "She'll be okay," Harrison said quietly, watching Nicole's hands shake as she tried to return the calls. "You don't know that." Nicole's voice was raw with 3 weeks of accumulated fear. "You don't know what it's like to watch your child fight for every breath while you serve food to people who spend more on lunch than you make in a week." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but Harrison didn't flinch. He'd earned the right to hear her frustration, had seen her at her most vulnerable. "No," he agreed. "I don't know what that's like." Something in his tone made Nicole look at him more closely. He stared out the window at Seattle's familiar neighborhoods, but his expression had gone distant, haunted. Lily never got sick, he continued. She was healthy, strong, perfect. I worried about normal parent things. Whether she was eating enough vegetables, if her preschool was challenging enough. I thought I had time to figure out how to be the father she deserved. The car turned onto MLK Jr. Way, passing through neighborhoods that told different stories than the downtown towers. Small houses with carefully tended gardens. Corner stores with hand-painted signs. People who worked multiple jobs and still smiled at their neighbors. What happened? Nicole asked, though she already knew the answer would break her heart. Harrison's hands clenched in his lap. 3 years of therapy, and he'd never been able to tell the story without falling apart. But something about this woman, this moment, made the words possible. March 15, 2022. I was supposed to pick her up from school, but I had a merger meeting that ran late. Sent my assistant instead. His voice stayed steady through sheer will. The drunk driver hit them at the intersection 2 blocks from her school. Nicole's breath caught. Harrison. My assistant lived. Broken ribs, concussion, but she lived. Lily. He stopped, swallowing hard. 7 years old. She was 7 years old and excited about a school play where she was going to be a sunflower. The car carried them through Nicole's neighborhood while Harrison's words filled the space between them with grief that had no bottom. She'd known he'd lost someone, but hearing the details, the specific horror of it, made her chest ache. The merger was worth $200 million, Harrison continued. I chose $200 million over picking up my daughter from school. That's not your fault, isn't it? Harrison finally looked at her. His eyes raw with self-blame. I had everything. Money, power, success. But I was always choosing work over the people who mattered. Always one more meeting, one more deal, one more opportunity to prove I was worth something. Nicole recognized the weight he carried, the way guilt could reshape every memory until love looked like neglect and normal choices became unforgivable sins. Where was her mother? She asked gently. Harrison's laugh was bitter. Catherine left when Lily was 4. Said being a CEO's wife was lonely, that I was married to my company instead of my family. She was right, but I couldn't see it then. The Mercedes turned onto Nicole Street, passing modest homes with toys in the yards and laundry on lines. Children's bicycles leaned against porch railings. The kind of neighborhood where people knew each other's names and watched out for each other's kids. Catherine remarried a teacher in Portland, Harrison continued. Someone who comes home for dinner every night and coaches Little League on weekends. Someone who knows how to love without turning it into a business transaction. Nicole felt the pieces of his story clicking into place. The isolation, the careful control, the inability to connect with anyone. Harrison hadn't just lost his daughter. He'd lost his entire understanding of what mattered. After the funeral, I threw myself deeper into work, he said. Built the company bigger, made more money. Proved I was successful by every measure that means nothing when you eat dinner alone every night. The car stopped in front of a small blue house with a struggling garden and a porch that needed painting. Nicole's home looked exactly like what it was, the best a single mother could afford while fighting medical bills and trying to raise a sick child alone. This is it, she said, but neither of them moved to get out. Through the front window, they could see Mrs. Rodriguez pacing with a small figure in her arms. Even from the car they could hear Kenna's cough, a sound that turned Nicole's fear into physical pain. I should go, she said, but her hand stayed on the door handle. Nicole. Harrison's voice stopped her. What you wrote on that note. How did you know? She turned to face him fully, seeing past the expensive clothes and controlled demeanor to someone as broken as she was, just in different ways. Because I see that look in the mirror every morning, she said simply. The look of someone who's afraid to love too much because losing hurts too badly. The admission hung between them like a bridge across an impossible divide. 2 people who'd learned that love was dangerous, that caring too deeply could destroy you. Kenna's father left the day we got her diagnosis, Nicole continued. Spina bifida. Not the worst case, but enough to mean surgeries and specialists and a lifetime of being different. He said he didn't sign up for a damaged child. Harrison's face darkened with an anger that had nothing to do with his own grief. He was an idiot. Maybe. But he was also honest about not being strong enough for the hard parts. Nicole's voice held the exhaustion of someone who'd carried too much for too long. I've been doing it alone ever since. Working double shifts, fighting insurance companies, pretending I'm strong enough when I'm falling apart inside. You are strong enough. Am I? Because most days I feel like I'm drowning, and today I risked my job to write 4 words to a stranger because I couldn't stand watching someone else eat alone. The raw honesty broke something open in Harrison's chest. Here was someone who understood that success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with, that money couldn't buy the kind of connection that made life worth living. Those 4 words, he said quietly, were the first time in 3 years anyone saw past the suit to whatever was left underneath. Nicole's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for weeks. I see you, Harrison. I see someone who loved his daughter so much that losing her broke everything you thought you knew about life. The words hit him like absolution he'd never thought possible. Someone saw his pain and didn't turn away. Someone understood that grief was love with nowhere to go. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared on the porch, holding Kenna and looking worried. The little girl's cries were audible even through the car windows. She needs you, Harrison said. Nicole nodded, but before she opened the door, she turned back to him one more time. What are you going to do now? Go back to eating alone and pretending that's enough. The question lingered as she stepped out of the car and ran toward her daughter. Harrison watched through the window as Nicole took Kenna into her arms. Saw the little girl's face relax the moment her mother's voice reached her. Love. Real, fierce, complicated love that survived financial pressure and medical crises and the daily grind of just getting by. Love that looked nothing like the careful transactions he'd mistaken for connection. Harrison's driver waited patiently, probably wondering why his boss was sitting in a working-class neighborhood watching a scene of domestic crisis that had nothing to do with him. But it had everything to do with him. Because for the first time since Lily died, Harrison felt something other than emptiness where his heart used to be. Harrison found himself getting out of the car before he'd made a conscious decision to do so. His driver looked confused but said nothing as his billionaire passenger walked toward a modest house in a neighborhood that didn't appear on the society pages. Nicole was already inside with Kenna, but Mrs. Rodriguez stood on the porch, watching him approach with curious eyes. Are you the man who brought Nicole home? She asked in accented English, her tone protective. Yes, ma'am. I wanted to make sure everything was okay. The elderly woman studied him with the sharp assessment of someone who'd raised 5 children and knew the difference between genuine concern and hollow politeness. She's a good mother, Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly. Works too hard, worries too much, but that little girl is loved. I can see that. Through the open door, Harrison could hear Nicole's voice, soft and soothing, talking Kenna through taking her medicine. The sound was foreign to him. Unconditional love wrapped in patience and strength. You can come in, Mrs. Rodriguez decided. But if you upset that baby, I will personally remove you from this house. The threat was delivered with grandmother's authority, and Harrison found himself smiling for the first time all day. Yes, ma'am. Nicole's living room was small but warm, decorated with Kenna's artwork and photographs that told the story of 7 years lived fully despite challenges. The furniture was second-hand but clean, arranged to maximize space in a home where every square foot mattered. Nicole sat on the couch with Kenna curled against her chest, the little girl's breathing finally steady. Up close, Harrison could see the resemblance. The same determined chin, the same expressive eyes that missed nothing. Hey, baby girl, Nicole murmured, stroking Kenna's dark curls. Mama's here now. You feeling better? Kenna nodded against her mother's shoulder, then noticed the stranger standing in their living room. Instead of shyness, she regarded Harrison with frank curiosity. Are you the man who brought Mama home in the fancy car? She asked, her voice still hoarse from coughing. I am. I'm Harrison. I'm Kenna Marie Washington, and I'm 7 years old. She delivered this information with the serious dignity of someone who'd learned that adult conversations often centered around her medical condition. Are you Mama's friend? The question hung in the air, deceptively simple but loaded with implications neither adult was ready to examine. We just met today, Nicole said carefully. Harrison was at the restaurant when the accident happened. What kind of accident? Kenna perked up with 7-year-old fascination for disaster stories. Nicole and Harrison exchanged glances, both recognizing the need to edit reality for young ears. Harrison surprised himself by answering first. There was a small fire in the kitchen, he said. Your mama helped an elderly lady who got hurt. She was very brave. Mama's always brave, Kenna said matter-of-factly. She's not scared of anything. Harrison saw Nicole's small smile at her daughter's absolute faith, saw also the weight of living up to that image when fear was a constant companion. I bet she is, Harrison agreed. But sometimes even brave people need help. Kenna considered this seriously. Like when I'm sick and Mama needs Mrs. Rodriguez to watch me? Exactly like that. The conversation felt surreal. A billionaire CEO discussing life philosophy with a 7-year-old in a living room that could fit inside his bathroom. But Harrison found himself more engaged than he'd been in any boardroom meeting. Are you sick too? Kenna asked with the directness children use to cut through adult pretense. Nicole started to intervene, but Harrison held up a gentle hand. The question deserved an honest answer. I was, he said slowly. My heart was sick for a long time. But today your mama helped me feel a little better. Kenna nodded as if this made perfect sense. Mama's good at fixing things. She fixed my nightstand when it broke, and she fixes my bad dreams by reading me stories. What kind of stories? Harrison asked, genuinely curious. Princess stories, but not the boring ones where they wait for princes. The ones where they save themselves and help other people too. Nicole laughed. The sound warm and genuine. Kenna's very particular about her heroines. Smart girl. Harrison looked at Kenna with growing respect. What's your favorite story? Kenna lit up, launching into an elaborate retelling of a princess who used engineering skills to build bridges between warring kingdoms. Her animated gestures and dramatic voices made the story come alive, transforming the small living room into a stage. Harrison found himself laughing at Kenna's impressions of various characters, caught up in her infectious enthusiasm. When had he last heard a child's laughter? When had he last felt the simple joy of shared imagination? Tell him about the Dragon Princess, Nicole prompted, clearly enjoying seeing her daughter animated and healthy. Kenna needed no further encouragement, diving into another tale while Harrison listened with rapt attention. Her stories were complex, featuring characters who faced real problems with creativity and kindness instead of magic swords or rescue missions. You're an excellent storyteller, Harrison told her when she finished. Have you ever thought about writing your stories down? I draw them, Kenna said proudly. Mama says I'm an artist. Can I see? Kenna scrambled off the couch with 7-year-old energy, returning with a worn sketch pad filled with colorful drawings. Her artwork showed real talent. Detailed scenes that captured emotion and movement with impressive skill for her age. Harrison studied each page carefully, asking questions about characters and plot points that made Kenna glow with pride. Nicole watched the interaction with growing wonder, seeing her serious, often tired daughter blossom under genuine adult attention. This one's my favorite, Kenna said, pointing to a drawing of a woman in a blue dress standing in front of a large building. That's Mama at her work, but she's really a superhero in disguise. Harrison looked closer at the drawing, recognizing the Meridian restaurant in the background. Nicole wore a cape invisible to everyone except her daughter's loving eyes. She is a superhero, Harrison said quietly. Definitely. Nicole felt tears threaten, overwhelmed by watching her daughter share her artwork with someone who took it seriously. Most adults offered polite compliments and moved on, but Harrison engaged with Kenna's creativity as if her 7-year-old perspective held real value. Are you hungry? Nicole asked suddenly. I was going to make grilled cheese and soup. The domestic offer surprised them both. Harrison couldn't remember the last time someone had offered to cook for him. Really cook, not cater an expensive meal, but stand in a kitchen and make food with their own hands. I don't want to impose. Please stay, Kenna interrupted. I want to show you my room and my fish tank and my collection of interesting rocks. The pure enthusiasm in her voice was impossible to resist. Harrison looked at Nicole, who nodded with a shy smile. Okay, he said. I'd like that. While Nicole moved around her small kitchen with practiced efficiency, Harrison let Kenna give him the full tour of their home. She showed him her bedroom with its cheerful yellow walls and careful arrangement of treasures. Her fish tank with 3 goldfish named after characters from her favorite books. Her rock collection, each specimen carefully labeled with where she'd found it and what made it special. This one's from the beach, Kenna explained, holding up a smooth stone worn by ocean waves. And this one's from the park where Mama takes me to feed the ducks. Harrison handled each rock as if it were precious, listening to stories that revealed a child who found wonder in ordinary moments. Kenna's collection wasn't valuable by any monetary measure, but the care with which she'd assembled it spoke to a richness he'd forgotten existed. "Dinner's ready," Nicole called from the kitchen. They gathered around a small table that barely fit 3 people, eating grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup from mismatched bowls. The food was simple but prepared with love, seasoned with conversation that felt more nourishing than any meal Harrison had eaten in years. Kenna chattered about school and friends and plans for summer vacation, including Harrison in the conversation as if he'd always been part of their small family circle. Nicole watched her daughter's animated face, seeing joy replace the worry that had dominated their home for weeks. "This is really good," Harrison said, meaning more than just the food. Nicole smiled, understanding the deeper appreciation in his voice. "Thank you for staying. Kenna doesn't get much chance to talk to, well, to people outside our usual circle. Thank you for letting me stay. This is..." Harrison paused, searching for words to describe something he'd never experienced. "This is what a home feels like." The simple statement carried weight that made Nicole's breath catch. Here was a man who had everything money could buy but had forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere. After dinner, Kenna insisted on showing Harrison her bedtime routine, which included reading a story together. She curled up between them on the couch, her small body warm and trusting as Nicole read about brave princesses and clever heroes. Harrison found himself transported by the domestic ritual, remembering evenings with Lily when stories felt like magic and bedtime meant safety instead of solitude. But instead of the usual stab of grief, he felt something closer to peace. This was what he'd lost. Not just his daughter, but the entire experience of loving and being loved without conditions or complications. The simple grace of sharing ordinary moments with people who mattered. "One more story?" Kenna asked hopefully when Nicole closed the book. "Nice try, little miss," Nicole laughed. "Time for bed. Will Harrison be here tomorrow?" Kenna asked as Nicole tucked her in. The question hung in the air like a prayer and a fear combined. Harrison looked at Nicole, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. "We'll see," Nicole said gently. "Right now, you need sleep so you can get stronger." Kenna accepted this non-answer with 7-year-old grace, but her next words stopped both adults in their tracks. "I hope so," she said seriously. "Harrison looks less sad when he smiles." Out of the mouths of babes. Harrison felt his throat close with emotion as Nicole kissed her daughter goodnight and turned off the bedroom light. They stood in the hallway outside Kenna's room, both struggling with feelings too complex for words. What had started as a crisis had become something neither had expected, a glimpse of what connection could look like when it was built on truth instead of pretense. Harrison's phone shattered the intimate quiet like a sledgehammer through glass. The ringtone, reserved for his board of directors, cut through the peaceful aftermath of bedtime stories and shared laughter. Nicole watched his face change as he looked at the caller ID, saw the careful warmth drain away and something colder take its place. "I have to take this," he said, already moving toward the front door. "Harrison Webb," he answered, his voice resuming the crisp authority that ruled conference rooms and shareholder meetings. Nicole couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched through the window as Harrison paced her small front yard, his free hand gesturing with increasing frustration. His expensive suit, still damp from the restaurant sprinklers, looked increasingly out of place against her neighborhood's modest backdrop. The call lasted 15 minutes. When Harrison came back inside, something fundamental had shifted. "Everything okay?" Nicole asked, though his expression already provided the answer. "There's been a development with the Portland acquisition. The other board members have been trying to reach me all afternoon." Harrison's tone was measured, professional, distant. They need me in the office tonight for emergency sessions with legal counsel. The words felt like stones dropping into the warm space they'd created. Nicole nodded, understanding but unable to hide her disappointment. Of course. I know you have responsibilities. But Harrison's phone buzzed again before he could respond. This time it was a text message, followed by another, then 3 more in rapid succession. His face grew darker with each notification. What is it? Nicole asked. Harrison hesitated, then turned his phone screen toward her. The messages were from his assistant, his chief financial officer, and 2 board members. But it was the last one that made Nicole's blood freeze. A photo. Harrison emerging from his Mercedes outside her house, taken with a telephoto lens from across the street. The caption read, Web Industries CEO seen visiting low-income housing. Developing story. Someone followed us here, Harrison said quietly. The implications hit them both simultaneously. Harrison Webb didn't visit working-class neighborhoods unless there was a business angle. His presence at Nicole's home would generate speculation, investigation, unwanted attention that could destroy both their lives in different ways. Nicole's phone rang. Her supervisor from the restaurant. Nicole, I just got a very interesting call from a reporter asking about your relationship with Harrison Webb. Care to explain what's going on? Nicole's heart sank. There's no relationship. He gave me a ride home after the restaurant accident. From what I understand, he's been inside your house for over 2 hours. That doesn't look like giving someone a ride home. The suspicion in her supervisor's voice was unmistakable. Nicole worked in a world where employee conduct was strictly monitored, where any hint of impropriety with wealthy customers could mean immediate termination. It's not what it looks like, Nicole said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. What it looks like is that you cultivated a personal relationship with a VIP client, which violates every policy in our employee handbook. I need you in my office first thing tomorrow morning. The call ended, leaving Nicole staring at her phone in disbelief. 3 weeks of perfect service, 3 years of never missing a shift or causing problems, and now her job hung in the balance because she'd shown basic human kindness. Harrison was dealing with his own crisis. His assistant's messages painted a picture of board members in full panic mode, demanding explanations for his absence during crucial negotiations, questioning his judgment, wondering if his mysterious disappearance indicated some kind of breakdown. The Portland deal is worth $400 million, he said, more to himself than to Nicole. If it falls through because I wasn't available. Go, Nicole said simply. Handle your business. But Harrison's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from his head of public relations, a woman who specialized in crisis management for high-profile executives. Harrison, we have a problem, she said without preamble, her voice carrying through the phone speaker. Photos of you outside a house in Rainier Valley are circulating among financial reporters. There's speculation about everything from a secret family to a drug deal gone wrong. That's ridiculous. It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what the story looks like. A billionaire CEO disappearing during major business negotiations to visit a working-class neighborhood? The optics are terrible. Nicole felt sick. She'd risked her job to connect with someone whose pain matched her own, and now that moment of recognition was being twisted into something sordid and scandalous. What do you need me to do? Harrison asked his publicist. Get back to the office immediately. We need to craft a narrative that makes sense. Charitable foundation work, community outreach, anything that explains your presence there in terms people will understand. I wasn't doing charity work. Then what were you doing? The question hung in the air like an accusation. How could Harrison explain that he'd found something in Nicole's living room that all his success couldn't buy? How could he describe the peace he'd felt reading stories to a 7-year-old who saw him as a person instead of a bank account? I was helping someone, he said finally. That's what I'm talking about. We can work with that angle. Billionaire CEO personally ensures employee safety after workplace accident. It's perfect. Nicole's face went white. Employee safety? Is that what this was? Harrison looked at her, seeing the hurt and betrayal building in her eyes. His publicist was still talking, outlining strategies and damage control. but her words faded into background noise as he realized how his world was about to consume the fragile connection they'd built. "I have to go," he told his publicist, ending the call. But the damage was done. Nicole stood in her own living room looking like a stranger, her walls back up, her face carefully blank. "So that's the story?" she asked quietly. "Billionaire CEO ensures employee safety? That's how you explain sitting at my table, reading to my daughter, eating food I cooked with my own hands?" "Nicole, that's not." "What?" "That's not how you see it." Her voice rose slightly, careful not to wake Kenna but unable to contain her anger. "Because it sure sounds like you're already figuring out how to spin this into good publicity." Harrison's phone buzzed with another urgent message. The board was in emergency session. The Portland deal was hanging by a thread. His absence had already cost the company millions in delayed negotiations. "I have to handle this," he said. "My entire company is at risk. And my job is at risk too, but you don't see me calling publicists to figure out how to spin it." The accusation hit harder than it should have because it contained a grain of truth. Harrison was already thinking like a CEO, calculating damage control and strategic responses. 3 hours ago, he'd been a man finding connection. Now he was a billionaire protecting his empire. "That's not fair," he said. "Fair?" Nicole laughed, but the sound held no humor. "What's not fair is my daughter asking where Harrison went when you disappear back to your world like this was all some kind of charity case. Kenna has nothing to do with this. Kenna has everything to do with this. She liked you. She trusted you. And tomorrow when she asks why you're not coming back, what am I supposed to tell her?" Harrison's phone rang again. His driver, waiting outside, asking if they were returning to the office. The real world calling him back to responsibilities that couldn't wait for personal complications. "I don't know," Harrison admitted, and the honesty in his voice made everything worse. Nicole nodded slowly, understanding finally settling in her eyes. "I do. I tell her that some people are tourists in other people's lives. They visit for a few hours, take what they need, and go back where they belong. That's not what this is, isn't it? Because you're already halfway out the door." Harrison looked at her standing in the home where he'd felt more peace than in years of luxury. Her uniform was still damp from restaurant sprinklers. Her face showed exhaustion from weeks of nursing a sick child while working double shifts. She'd risked everything to write 4 words that had changed his life, and now he was about to walk away because staying was too complicated for his world to understand. "I built this company from nothing," he said quietly. "I have responsibilities to thousands of employees, to shareholders, to everyone except the people who actually see you," Nicole finished. "I get it. I understand the choice you're making." "I'm not making a choice. I'm trying to find a way to protect both of us." "By pretending this never happened?" Harrison's phone rang again. The board meeting was starting. Lawyers were standing by. $400 million in negotiations hung in the balance while he stood in a working-class living room trying to explain why he couldn't stay. "I have to go," he said finally. Nicole walked him to the door in silence. Outside, his Mercedes waited like a portal back to his real life, while photographers with telephoto lenses lurked somewhere in the darkness, turning their private moment into public spectacle. "Thank you," Harrison said at the door. "For today. For letting me see." "See what?" "What I'd forgotten was possible." Nicole's expression softened slightly, but she didn't step back from the doorway. "That doesn't make it real, Harrison. That just makes it a nice memory." He wanted to argue, to promise he'd find a way to make it work, to bridge the gap between their worlds. But his phone was buzzing with increasing urgency, and they both knew that some divides were too wide for good intentions to cross. Harrison walked to his car without looking back, knowing that if he turned around, he might not be able to leave at all. The Mercedes pulled away from the curb as Nicole closed her front door, leaving behind 4 words that had stopped his world and a connection that couldn't survive the light of day. In her living room, Nicole sat on the couch where they'd read stories together, holding Kenna's sketchpad and staring at the drawing of herself as a superhero. Tomorrow she'd face her supervisor's questions and probably lose her job. Tomorrow she'd have to explain to her daughter why the sad man who'd smiled at stories wouldn't be coming back. Tonight, she let herself feel the full weight of hope disappointed and connection severed by a world that didn't believe in fairy tales crossing class lines. Outside, photographers captured images of Harrison's departure, already crafting stories that would reduce their afternoon to scandal and speculation. Neither of them had realized how heavy the real world could be until it came crashing down on something as fragile as unexpected love. Wednesday, March 16, 2025, 3:47 a.m. Harrison stood in his glass tower office. Seattle's skyline spread below him like a circuit board of ambition and achievement. The Portland acquisition documents covered his conference table. $400 million in contracts and projections that should have commanded his complete attention. Instead, he kept thinking about grilled cheese sandwiches and 7-year-old wisdom about princesses who saved themselves. The emergency board meeting had lasted until 2 a.m. Legal counsel had crafted careful statements about Harrison's commitment to employee welfare following workplace incidents. The public relations team had prepared talking points that transformed his afternoon with Nicole into calculated corporate responsibility. Everyone was satisfied. The story was contained. The Portland deal could proceed without further complications. So why did Harrison feel like he'd sold his soul? His assistant had arranged the morning papers on his desk, front pages that praised web industry's hands-on leadership approach and CEO's personal commitment to worker safety. The photographs of him outside Nicole's house were accompanied by quotes from crisis management experts about authentic corporate values. The narrative was perfect and completely false. Harrison's phone buzzed with congratulations from board members and business associates. Text messages praising his handling of a potentially damaging situation. His stock price had actually risen overnight on news of his community engagement. He'd won. By every measure that mattered in his world, he'd emerged victorious. But victory felt like ash in his mouth. Same morning, Rainier Valley, Seattle. Nicole sat at her kitchen table, unemployment paperwork spread before her like evidence of dreams deferred. Her termination had been swift and efficient. A 10-minute meeting with Human Resources citing inappropriate conduct with customers and violation of professional boundaries. 3 years of perfect service, erased by one afternoon of human connection. Kenna slept late, her fever finally broken, unaware that their precarious financial situation had just become catastrophic. Nicole stared at the medical bills that had seemed overwhelming with a job and now looked impossible without one. Her phone had been ringing all morning. Reporters wanting statements about her relationship with Harrison Webb. Neighbors curious about the expensive car that had been photographed outside her house. Former co-workers whispering about scandal and speculation. She'd turned off the phone and drawn the curtains, but she couldn't shut out the sound of her own voice reading those newspaper quotes back to herself. Harrison calling their afternoon, part of my commitment to employee welfare. Their shared grief reduced to ensuring proper support for staff affected by workplace incidents. Had she imagined the moment between them? The way he'd looked at Kenna's artwork like it mattered? The peace in his face when they'd read stories together? Or had she been exactly what he'd needed in that moment? A convenient audience for his guilt about his daughter, a brief escape from his carefully controlled existence before returning to his real life? Mrs. Rodriguez knocked softly, entering with coffee and the kind of maternal concern that transcended language barriers. Mija, you need to eat something. I'm not hungry. And you need to stop reading those lies in the newspaper. Nicole looked up at the older woman who'd become family through proximity and shared struggles. What if they're not lies? What if that's exactly what I was to him? Mrs. Rodriguez settled heavily into the opposite chair, her weathered hands reaching across the table to cover Nicole's. I watched that man with your daughter yesterday. I saw his face when she showed him her drawings. That wasn't charity, Mija. That was a man remembering how to love. Then why did he leave? Because love is scary when you have everything to lose. The simple truth hit harder than accusations or anger. Harrison hadn't left because he didn't care. He'd left because caring was dangerous for someone whose life existed under constant scrutiny. But understanding his reasons didn't make the abandonment hurt less. Web Industries corporate office. 8:15 a.m. The Portland acquisition team presented their final proposals with military precision. Profit projections, market analysis, competitive advantages. Everything Harrison needed to approve the deal that would cement his reputation as a visionary leader. But his mind kept drifting to a small voice asking if he was Mama's friend, and the realization that he'd never answered that question honestly. Sir. His CFO was waiting for his signature on documents worth more than most countries' GDP. Harrison picked up his pen, then set it down again. Around the conference table, 12 of the most powerful business minds in Seattle waited for him to complete the transaction that would define the next decade of their corporate strategy. What's our employee satisfaction rating? Harrison asked suddenly. His CFO blinked in confusion. Sir. Our employees. The people who actually make this company run. How happy are they? I don't see how that's relevant to the Portland acquisition. How many of our restaurant staff can afford to eat in the restaurants where they work? Harrison continued, his voice gaining intensity. How many of our security guards live in neighborhoods they'd be embarrassed to invite us to visit? The room fell silent. These were not questions that belonged in acquisition meetings, not concerns that appeared on quarterly reports. Harrison, his chairman said carefully, perhaps we should take a short break. I fired someone yesterday, Harrison said, standing abruptly. A single mother with a sick child who wrote me a note that changed my life. I let her be terminated for showing me basic human kindness because it was easier than explaining why that mattered. His board members exchanged glances that spoke volumes about executive stress and the need for intervention. The note said 4 words, Harrison continued, his voice growing stronger. I see your pain. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt like a human being instead of a profit center. He walked to the windows that had always made him feel powerful, looking down at a city full of people whose names he'd never know, whose struggles he'd never see. We're going to restructure our employee benefit packages, he announced. Healthcare that actually covers their children's medical needs. Wages that let them live in the neighborhoods where they work. And we're going to start with our restaurant staff. Harrison, his CFO said slowly, the shareholders will never approve those expenditures. Then we'll find new shareholders. The declaration hung in the air like a bomb with its pin pulled. Harrison was suggesting they prioritize people over profits, humanity over quarterly earnings. Concepts that didn't exist in their world. The Portland deal, his chairman pressed. We need your signature. Harrison looked at the contracts one more time. $400 million that would buy more of everything he already had too much of. More success that felt hollow. More achievements that impressed people who didn't really know him. No, he said simply. No. We're not acquiring Portland. We're going to focus on taking care of the people who already work for us instead of expanding into new markets where we can exploit more workers. The room erupted in protests and demands for explanation. Board members talked over each other about fiduciary responsibility and shareholder value and the impossibility of what Harrison was proposing. But Harrison was already walking toward the door, his decision crystallizing with each step. Where are you going? His chairman called after him. To apologize to someone I should never have left. Rainier Valley, Seattle, 10:30 a.m. Harrison's Mercedes looked even more out of place in daylight, drawing curious stares from neighbors who'd seen the morning news coverage. He walked to Nicole's front door with steps that felt like crossing between worlds. Mrs. Rodriguez answered his knock, her expression skeptical but not hostile. You came back, she said simply. I need to talk to Nicole. To explain. She doesn't want to see you. The words hit like physical blows, but Harrison had expected them. I understand. But I need her to know that everything in those newspapers was lies. What happened between us wasn't charity or employee relations or anything except 2 people recognizing each other. Mrs. Rodriguez studied his face with the shrewd assessment of someone who'd raised children and grandchildren, someone who knew the difference between pretty words and genuine remorse. Wait here, she said finally. Through the front window, Harrison could see into Nicole's living room where Kenna sat on the couch, coloring in a book with intense concentration. She looked up when she noticed him outside, her face lighting up with uncomplicated joy. She ran to the window and pressed her small hands against the glass, mouthing, "Harrison," with excitement that made his chest ache. Nicole appeared behind her daughter, her face carefully composed but unable to hide the hurt in her eyes. For a long moment, they stared at each other through the glass barrier, both remembering what it had felt like to be seen and understood by another person. Then Nicole gently pulled Kenna away from the window and closed the curtains. Harrison stood on the porch for 10 more minutes, hoping she'd change her mind, hoping for another chance to explain what he was only beginning to understand himself. When it became clear she wasn't coming out, he did something he'd never done before. He sat down on her front steps and waited. Because some connections were worth fighting for, even when you'd forgotten how to fight for anything except profit margins and market share. Because some people were worth choosing, even when that choice meant losing everything you thought you wanted. And because love, real love, required courage he was finally ready to find. 2 hours later, Harrison was still sitting on Nicole's front steps when Kenna burst through the door like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. "Harrison, you're still here." She threw herself into his arms with 7-year-old abandon, her small body warm and trusting against his chest. Behind her, Nicole stood in the doorway, torn between maternal protectiveness and the undeniable joy on her daughter's face. "Mama said you had to go back to your important work," Kenna said, pulling back to study his face with serious eyes. "But you're here." "I am here," Harrison confirmed, meeting Nicole's gaze over her daughter's head. "And I'm not going anywhere." "But what about your important work?" "I figured out that my most important work isn't in an office." Nicole's expression softened slightly, but her walls remained firmly in place. "Kenna, go inside and wash your hands for lunch." "But Harrison just got here." "Inside, baby girl." Kenna sighed with the dramatic flair of a child whose plans had been thwarted, but she obeyed, pausing only to whisper loudly to Harrison, "Don't leave again, okay?" "I won't," he promised, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Nicole waited until the door closed before speaking, her voice carefully controlled. "You shouldn't have come back. This isn't fair to her." "You're right. It's not fair to make promises I can't keep." Harrison stood slowly, his expensive suit wrinkled from sitting on concrete steps. "But I can keep this one." "Can you?" "Because yesterday you had important board meetings and emergency calls, and today will bring something else that's more important than." "I quit." The words stopped her mid-sentence. Nicole stared at him, processing what he'd said. "You what?" "I resigned from Web Industries. Effective immediately." Harrison's voice was steady, sure. "Told them they can keep their $400 million deal and their profit margins. I'm done choosing money over people who matter." Nicole's facade cracked slightly. "That's insane. You can't just walk away from everything you built." "I'm not walking away from everything. I'm walking toward what matters." "Harrison, you don't understand what you're saying. That company is your life." "No." His voice was gentle but firm. "That company was my hiding place. My excuse for not living after Lily died. But yesterday, sitting in your living room, reading stories with your daughter, I remembered what it felt like to be alive." Nicole's hands trembled as she gripped the doorframe. "You'll regret this. When the reality hits, when you remember what you gave up." "The only thing I'll regret is if I let you walk away because I was too scared to fight for something real." The raw honesty in his voice broke through her defenses like water through a dam. Nicole felt 3 years of careful self-protection crumbling under the weight of possibility. "I lost my job because of you," she whispered. "I know. And I'm going to spend every day making up for that if you'll let me." "How? You can't just snap your fingers and fix." "I bought the Meridian." Nicole's breath caught. "You what?" "This morning. Cash offer. The owners accepted immediately." Harrison stepped closer, hope and determination warring in his expression. "First change I'm making is reinstating you with a raise and full benefits that actually cover Kenna's medical needs." The magnitude of what he was saying hit her like a physical force. He hadn't just quit his company. He'd bought her workplace to ensure she had a job. He'd risked everything he'd built to prove that their connection mattered more than his empire. That's crazy, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Maybe. But yesterday you wrote 4 words that saved my life. Today I'm returning the favor. Nicole's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for 24 hours. You can't just solve everything with money, Harrison. You're right. Money can't solve the important things. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, carefully folded. But it can buy time for the things that really matter. Nicole recognized her own handwriting. I see your pain. I've been carrying this since yesterday, Harrison said softly. Because it's the first time in 3 years anyone saw past what I have to who I am. Harrison. I love you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating and completely true. Nicole felt her heart stop, restart, then begin beating in a rhythm she'd forgotten was possible. You can't love me. You barely know me. I know you're brave enough to risk your job for a stranger's heart. I know you're strong enough to raise a daughter alone while fighting insurance companies and working double shifts. I know you see princess stories as lessons about self-rescue instead of waiting for someone else to save you. Harrison stepped closer, his voice growing stronger with each word. I know you make grilled cheese sandwiches that taste like home and you read bedtime stories with voices that make characters come alive. I know you carry hospital bracelets in your pocket and you see superheroes in your daughter's drawings of everyday moments. Nicole was crying now, years of loneliness and struggle and desperate hope spilling down her cheeks. I know, Harrison continued, that you wrote 4 words that reached across an impossible divide and reminded a broken man that love is worth the risk of loss. This is crazy, Nicole sobbed. We live in different worlds. No, we live in the same world. We just forgot how to see it until we found each other. The front door opened behind Nicole, and Kenna appeared with the perfect timing that children seem to possess for dramatic moments. Mama, why are you crying? Is Harrison making you sad? Nicole laughed through her tears, wiping her eyes as she knelt to her daughter's level. No, baby girl. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy. Are you happy? Nicole looked at Harrison, seeing past the expensive clothes and corporate reputation to someone who'd chosen love over safety, connection over control. Someone who'd risked everything he'd built for the chance to belong somewhere real. Yeah, she said quietly. I think I am. Kenna clapped her hands with delight. Does this mean Harrison can stay for lunch? I made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and they're really good even though I accidentally used too much jelly. Harrison knelt beside Nicole, his hand finding hers as naturally as breathing. If your mama says it's okay, I'd love to stay for lunch. And dinner. And every meal after that if you'll have me. Forever. Kenna asked with 7-year-old directness. Harrison looked at Nicole, seeing his own hope reflected in her eyes. If your mama will have me, then yes. Forever. Nicole's answer came not in words but in the way she leaned into him, finally allowing herself to believe that some connections were strong enough to bridge any divide. Forever sounds good, she whispered against his shoulder. 6 months later, the Meridian staff break room had been transformed into something revolutionary, a place where employees were actually encouraged to take breaks, where healthcare enrollment specialists held weekly office hours, where childcare vouchers and education assistance programs were discussed as normal parts of employment. Nicole finished her shift and found Harrison waiting in his usual spot at table 7, not as a customer but as someone who belonged in her world. He'd kept his promise about buying the restaurant, but more importantly, he'd kept his promise about staying. The transition hadn't been easy. Business colleagues had called him insane. Financial advisors had predicted disaster. But the restaurant's employee satisfaction scores had reached record highs, customer loyalty had increased, and Harrison had discovered that success felt different when it was measured in people's lives instead of profit margins. How was your day? He asked as Nicole approached, the same question he'd asked every day for 6 months, as if her answer mattered more than quarterly reports. Good. Mrs. Patterson came in again. She specifically requested me because she says I'm the one who saved her life during the explosion. You did save her life. We saved her life, Nicole corrected, settling into the chair beside him. Together. Through the restaurant windows, they could see Kenna playing in the small park across the street, her laughter carrying on the evening breeze. She'd adjusted to their new normal with the resilience of childhood, accepting Harrison's presence in their lives as naturally as she'd accepted everything else. She drew a new picture today, Nicole said, pulling out a folded paper from her apron pocket. Harrison studied Kenna's latest artwork, a drawing of 3 people standing in front of a house, all of them smiling, all of them connected by carefully drawn hands. She labeled it "My Family," Nicole said softly. Harrison traced the crayon figures with one finger, remembering the man who'd sat alone at this table 6 months ago, convinced that love was too dangerous to risk. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. Nicole expected another small gift. He'd been bringing her flowers and coffee and little tokens that showed he was thinking of her. Instead, he pulled out a small velvet box that made her breath catch. "Harrison, I know it's fast," he said quickly. "I know we're still figuring everything out. But I also know that I want to spend every day for the rest of my life proving that love is stronger than fear." He opened the box to reveal a ring that was beautiful but not ostentatious, elegant but not excessive. A ring chosen for a woman who valued substance over show. "Nicole Washington," Harrison said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Will you marry me? Will you let me be part of your family officially? Will you trust me with forever?" Nicole looked at the ring, then at the man offering it, then through the window at her daughter playing in the park. 6 months ago, she'd been a single mother fighting medical bills and working double shifts just to survive. Today, she was a woman who'd found love in the most unexpected place, with someone who'd proven that real connection could survive any external pressure. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." Harrison slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, overcome by the simple miracle of being chosen by someone who saw his heart instead of his bank account. Across the street, Kenna looked up from her play and waved enthusiastically at them through the window. They waved back, 3 people who'd found each other across impossible odds and decided that love was worth every risk. The note that had started it all remained folded in Harrison's wallet, for words that had changed 2 lives and proven that sometimes the most powerful connections begin with the simplest truth. "I see your pain." But more importantly, they'd learned to see each other's joy.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.